The bustling streets of New York City surrounded me as I made my way to the NYPD headquarters. It had been years since I set foot in this concrete jungle, and the towering skyscraper still managed to make me feel small. As I approached the imposing building, a familiar voice cut through the city noise.
This isn't a place for useless small-town cops like you. Go back to your backwater town, loser.
I had just transferred from a small-town precinct to the NYPD, and already I was facing resistance. Kyle, my former classmate who now works as a detective in the NYPD, called me worthless. His words stung, but I refused to let it show on my face. Even if I worked in a small town, I'm still a police officer. I take pride in my work. I straightened my back and met Kyle's gaze, determined not to let him see how much his words affected me. As I was internally fuming, Kyle continued his tirade.
Let me guess. The most exciting case you've had is helping old ladies fix their plumbing, right? You're basically stealing your paycheck. How dare you even call yourself a cop?
Kyle's loud voice drew attention from others around us. Officers passing by glanced our way, some with curiosity, others with disapproval. I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment, but I held my ground. Just then, a booming voice echoed through the hallway. Hey, who do you think you're talking to? The chief of police rushed over to us, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. Kyle's smug expression faltered as he realized he'd been caught in the act. My name is Sam Turner. I was born in New York City, but I grew up in my mother's small hometown because we were a single-parent family. The transition from the big city to a quiet, rural community wasn't easy, but over time, I grew to love the simplicity and warmth of small-town life. I attended a local high school and college before becoming a police officer. It was a dream I had harbored since childhood, inspired by the stories my mother told me about my father's bravery as a cop in the big city. Though I never knew him well, those tales shaped my ambition. Wanting to give back to the community that raised me, I chose to work at the local police station. It wasn't a glamorous job by any means, but it felt right. Every morning, as I donned my uniform and pinned on my badge, I felt a sense of purpose that I couldn't quite explain. One crisp autumn morning, I stood in front of the police station, watching as the town slowly came to life. The air was filled with the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from nearby chimneys. "Morning, officer!" chorused the young voices called out. I turned to see a line of elementary school kids wearing colorful backpacks passing by. Their faces were bright with excitement for the day ahead. "Good morning," I replied with a smile. "Be careful on your way." "We will," they chorused back, their enthusiasm infectious. As I watched them go, a pang of nostalgia hit me. This is a small town facing depopulation. I've heard that there are far fewer children now than when my mother was growing up. But exchanging greetings with these lively kids gives me energy to start the day. Their presence is a reminder of why I do this job, to keep this community safe for the next generation. Just as I was about to head inside, an old pickup truck pulled up in front of the station. Mr. Johnson, one of the local farmers, stepped out with a crate of vegetables in his arms. "Officer, here are some vegetables from our farm," he said, his weathered face crinkling into a kind smile. I hurried over to help him with the crate. "Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. You didn't have to do this." He waved off my thanks. "It's nothing, son. Just our way of showing appreciation for all you do." This was a common occurrence in our town. Sometimes, local farmers bring freshly harvested vegetables in large quantities, more than enough to share among all the officers at the station. Thanks to their generosity, I don't have to buy seasonal vegetables. It's one of the many perks of small-town life that I've come to cherish. As I carried the crate inside, I couldn't help but reflect on the nature of my work here. This small town hasn't seen a major crime in decades. Everyone knows each other, and the crime rate is so low that people don't even need to lock their doors. It's a far cry from the bustling, often dangerous streets of New York City where I was born. We're busier dealing with wildlife incidents or natural disasters than actual crimes. Just last week, I'd helped Mrs. Anderson coax her cat out of a tree. And the week before that, I spent an entire afternoon helping to sandbag the creek when heavy rains threatened to flood the lower part of town. I worked in urban areas for a few years after becoming a police officer. The experience was eye-opening, to say the least. Constant hum of sirens, the unpredictability of each call, the adrenaline rush of chasing down suspects. It was everything I'd imagined police work to be when I was a kid dreaming of following in my father's footsteps. But as time went on, I found myself yearning for something different. The relentless pace of city life began to wear on me. I missed the sense of community, personal connections, the feeling that I was making a real difference in people's lives. That's when I realized that working in a small town police station suited me better. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. I was at my desk filling out paperwork on a minor dispute between neighbors over a fallen tree branch when Sheriff Dan poked his head into the office.
"Sam, can I see you in my office for a moment?"
He asked, his usually jovial face uncharacteristically serious. Puzzled, I followed him. As I entered his office, I noticed an official-looking envelope on his desk. "What's going on, Sheriff?" I asked, a knot of unease forming in my stomach. The sheriff sighed heavily and gestured for me to take a seat.
"Sam, I've just received some unusual orders concerning you."
"Me?" I echoed, confused. "What kind of orders?"
"A transfer,"
he said, his tone grave.
"At this time of year."
I blinked in surprise. A transfer? At this time of year? It was unheard of. Transfers typically happen at the beginning of the fiscal year, not in the middle of October. The sheriff nodded, looking as perplexed as I felt.
"It's highly unusual, but it's an order from the top."
He explained that he needed to speak with me directly. The order had come from the top brass of the NYPD, bypassing the state police, which surprised even the sheriff. It was unprecedented, to say the least. With a hesitant hand, he pushed the envelope across the desk towards me.
"This arrived this morning. It's marked Top Secret."
I picked up the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. As I read through the document, my eyes widened. My first impression was that it seemed like something out of a fiction novel, but it clearly stated the special mission assigned to me and the name of the person who issued the order. I don't understand," I stammered, looking up at the sheriff. "Why me? I'm just a small-town cop." The sheriff shrugged, looking equally bewildered.
"Your guess is as good as mine, Sam. Orders are orders, especially when they come from this high up."
I sat back in my chair, trying to process the sudden turn of events. "I was really enjoying my work here," I said quietly, more to myself than to the sheriff. He smiled sympathetically.
"I've heard you're well liked by the local residents. We'll be waiting for your return."
The sheriff patted my shoulder as I resigned myself to the situation. As a public servant, orders from above are absolute. There's no option to refuse. I didn't know how long it would take, but I hoped I could return to my small-town police work once this job was done. As I left the sheriff's office, my mind was reeling. How was I going to explain this to everyone? What about my responsibilities here? Most importantly, what exactly was the secret mission that required me to return to New York City? The next few days passed in a blur of preparations and goodbyes. The news of my sudden transfer spread quickly through the town, and I found myself inundated with well wishes and care packages from the locals. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery insisted on sending me off a box of her famous apple turnovers. "It reminds you of home," she said with a wink. On my last night in town, my colleagues at the station threw me a small farewell party. As we sat around, sharing stories and laughter, I felt a pang of sadness. These people had become my family over the years, and leaving them felt like leaving a part of myself behind.
"You better not forget about us city slickers when you're solving big cases in the Bag Apple," joked Officer Mike, raising his soda on a mock toast. I chuckled, shaking my head. As if I could ever forget you guys. I'll be back before you know it. But as I said those words, I couldn't shake off the feeling that things were about to change in ways I couldn't even begin to imagine. The next morning, I found myself on a train bound for New York City, my small suitcase tucked overhead, and a top-secret document burning a hole in my pocket. As the familiar landscapes of my small town gave way to increasingly urban scenery, I tried to prepare myself mentally for what lay ahead. I arrived in New York City after a long time away. The cityscape had changed at an unimaginable pace. Crowds of people moved about endlessly, each person lost in their own world, barely acknowledging those around them. The cacophony of car horns, construction work, and the general buzz of city life was almost overwhelming, after years of small-town quiet. Having grown accustomed to small-town life, I felt more bewildered than nostalgic. The New York I remembered from my childhood seemed like a distant dream compared to the reality before me. Skyscrapers that weren't there before now touched the clouds, and entire neighborhoods had been transformed. Somehow, I managed to navigate the subway system and made my way to the NYPD headquarters. As I stood before the imposing building, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead.
I was assigned to the Criminal Investigation Division. The bustling office was a far cry from the quiet, laid-back atmosphere of my small-town precinct. Detectives rushed back and forth. Phones rang incessantly, and the air was thick with tension and urgency. As I made my way through the office, trying to find my assigned desk, I saw a familiar face. My heart sank as I recognized him. Kyle Johnson. Swallowing my apprehension, I approached him. "Hey, long time no see," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Kyle looked up from his computer, his eyes widening in surprise before narrowing in disdain.
Huh? Why are you here?
Kyle Johnson. We were classmates from the same hometown, attending the same elementary and middle schools. We reunited at the police academy and joined the force at the same time. He's now a detective. However, we were never really close friends. I grew up in a single-parent household, which made me different from the other kids. The world of children can be cruel, and I became a target for teasing and bullying. Memories of our childhood flooded back. The taunts, the pranks, the isolation. Kyle had been at the forefront of it all, always ready with a cruel remark or a shove in the hallway.
Hey, why do you only have a mom? Did your dad abandon you? Wow, look at this guy using such a tiny pencil. Can't afford a new one, huh?
Kyle was one of the bullies. I wanted to fight back, but I knew from experience that saying anything would only make them enjoy it more. So I ignored them. Fortunately, I was naturally athletic and fast, so I managed to avoid them most of the time. Out of frustration, Kyle and his friends started calling me Slippery Sam. That's how I protected myself as a kid, by running away. Now, years later, I found myself face to face with my childhood tormentor once again. Kyle hadn't changed much. He still had the same arrogant smirk, same look of superiority in his eyes.
So, where have you been working?
Kyle asked, his tone dripping with condensation. I hesitated for a moment before answering. I was at the police station in Peaceful Valley. Kyle's eyebrows shot up.
Huh? Where's that? Wait, is that even a real police station?
His tone brought back unpleasant memories. That's right. This is how Kyle used to tease me, that smug grin on his face. Some things never changed, it seems.
I bet the most exciting case you've had is helping old ladies with their plumbing, right? You're basically stealing your paycheck. How dare you even call yourself a cop?
Kyle's voice had risen, drawing attention from a nearby desk. I tried to brush it off with a quiet, "Yeah, sure," but my attitude seemed to annoy Kyle even more. Kyle stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor.
This isn't a place for useless small-town cops like you. Go back to your backwater town.
Kyle's loud voice drew attention from others around us. I could feel the eyes of the entire office on us. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. This was not how I envisioned my first day at the NYPD. Just as I was about to respond, a deep voice cut through the tension.
"Johnson, that's enough. He's our colleague."
We both turned to see the division chief approaching, his face stern. Kyle immediately straightened up, his demeanor changing in an instant.
But Chief,
Kyle began, but the chief held up a hand silencing him. The chief turned to me, his expression softening slightly.
"Turner, sorry to put you to work right away, but we've got a job. Johnson and Turner, you two will work together in the fraud group case."
My heart sank. Working with Kyle was the last thing I wanted, but I knew better than to protest in a direct order. Kyle, on the other hand, had no such reservations.
wait a minute.
Kyle exclaimed, his face reddening.
Why do I have to work with this small-town nobody?
The chief's eyes flashed dangerously.
"Shut up! This is an order. I want that perp caught as soon as possible. I'm getting pressure from above too. Counting on you."
With that, the chief turned and walked away, leaving Kyle and me in an uncomfortable silence. The rest of the office quickly returned to their work, though I could feel curious glances being thrown our way. Kyle glared at me, his earlier smugness replaced by barely concealed anger.
To think I'd end up working with Slippery Sam,
he muttered.
Hey, don't you dare run away when we face a suspect, alright? Running away is the only thing you've ever been good at. Man, this sucks. Having a small-town nobody like you as my partner really cramps my style.
As we walked down the hallway to the briefing room, Kyle kept taunting me. His bad habit of looking down on people and mocking them hasn't changed a bit. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that I was here for a reason, even if Kyle didn't know it. Suddenly, a voice from behind us made Kyle freeze mid-insult.
It's not very admirable to mock your partner like that.
Kyle spun around, his face paling.
Chief?
Chief Richard Hawthorne stood there, his imposing figure filling the hallway. He's the second in command at the NYPD, right below the commissioner. His reputation preceded him. A tough, no-nonsense cop with a track record that commanded respect from even the most hardened officers.
What do you think of him?
Hawthorne asked Kyle, his tone deceptively casual.
Turner here is our top detective with the highest arrest rate.
Kyle's jaw dropped.
What? This guy? No way!
I could almost see the gears turning in Kyle's head as he tried to reconcile his image of me with what the chief had just said. Surprised by Chief Hawthorne's sudden appearance, Kyle turned and saluted, his attitude changing dramatically.
Chief Hawthorne, sir. I was just welcoming Turner to the team.
His attitude changes depending on who he's talking to. He's so predictable. I had to suppress a smile at Kyle's obvious discomfort. Hawthorne tore it to me, his expression softening slightly.
Turner, sorry for calling you from so far away.
It's fine, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady under the scrutiny of both Kyle and the chief. Hawthorne nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth.
Now that our top detective Turner is here, we should be alright. I expect we'll catch the culprits soon. Lately, we've had a series of fraud cases. The media is starting to make noise about it.
Kyle, seemingly unable to contain himself, interjected.
Yes, sir. With all due respect, even if Turner has the highest arrest rate, things are different between small towns and big cities.
I tensed, waiting for the chief's response. To my surprise, Hawthorne nodded thoughtfully.
You're right,
he said.
That's why he's paired with you. You know this area well, don't you? Make sure to teach Turner everything he needs to know. I have high expectations for your partnership.
Kyle's chest puffed up at the chief's words.
Yes, sir. I, Kyle Johnson, will dedicate myself fully to this mission.
It's rare for a detective to be addressed directly by the chief of police. Kyle seemed moved by the chief's words, but when he turned back to me, he gave me a dismissive look. As Chief Hawthorne walked away, Kyle leaned in close, his voice low and menacing.
Huh. Just because you had the highest arrest rate in your small town doesn't mean much. What did you arrest? A bunch of raccoons or something? Don't worry. Your senior partner here will teach you everything from scratch. Just remember, your small town ways will cut it here. We're doing things my way. Got it?
Kyle's face was full of self-importance as he treated me like a subordinate. I couldn't help but remember how he used to be when we were kids. Kyle's father was a company executive, and his family was wealthy. I remember how he used to brag about him when we were kids.
My dad just brought me the latest gaming console,
he'd boast, showing off his expensive toys.
What did your mom get you? Oh, wait. She probably can't afford anything, right?
His personality hasn't changed at all. If anything, his smooth career progression seems to have made his arrogant personality even worse. But that works in my favor right now. I bowed my head and said, I don't know how things work here, so I'll be relying on you. I could almost hear Kyle's ego was inflating at my words. The rest of the day was spent getting briefed on the ongoing fraud cases. The NYPD had been dealing with a sophisticated ring of fraudsters who had been targeting elderly residents across the city. They'd already swindled millions of dollars from unsuspecting victims, and the pressure was on to catch them before they could strike again. As Kyle droned on about his theories on the case, I found my mind wandering. Why was I really here? The top secret document in my pocket seemed to burn with unanswered questions. What did Chief Hawthorne know? And why pair me with Kyle of all people? My musings were interrupted by Kyle snapping his fingers in front of my face.
Hey, Slippery Sam. Are you even listening? This isn't your backwater town where you can daydream all day. We got real work to do here.
I nodded, forcing myself to focus. Sorry, you're right. Please, continue. Kyle smirked, clearly enjoying his perceived superiority.
As I was saying, we've identified a potential person of interest. His name is Adam, and we believe he might be one of the middlemen in his fraud operation. We need to surveil him and see if he leads us to a bigger fish.
As Kyle laid out his plan for the surveillance operation, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was excited to be working on such a high-profile case. On the other, the weight of my secret mission and the constant belittling from Kyle was taking their toll. Little did I know the real challenge was yet to come. On my first night after my arrival, I was about to head home early to unpack when Kyle suddenly appeared beside my desk, a mischievous glint in his eyes.
Hey, Sam,
He called out, slapping me on the back with unnecessary force.
the great me is going to teach you country bumpkin how to have fun in the big city.
Before I could protest, Kyle had grabbed my arm and was dragging me out of the office. But I should really unpack and get some rest. I tried to argue, but Kyle wasn't having any of it.
Come on, don't be such a bore,
He laughed.
You're in the big city now. It's time you learned how to live a little.
Kyle took me to a street lined with dazzling neon lights. The sidewalks were a crowd of people, music blaring from every doorway. It was a far cry from the quiet evenings I was used to in Peaceful Valley. We stopped in front of a particularly flashy establishment. The sign above the door read Starlight Lounge in glowing pink letters.
Here we are,
Kyle announced proudly.
the best gentleman's club in the city.
I hesitated at the entrance. While police officers do drink off duty, I never expected to go to a place like this. It seemed like Kyle just wanted to go himself and was using me as an excuse. As soon as we entered, Kyle's demeanor changed. He strained his posture and put on what I assume he thought was a charming smile.
Lily,
He called out.
I've missed you.
A stunningly beautiful woman in a glittering dress approached us, her face lighting up at the sight of Kyle. Kyle, darling, it's been too long. Kyle preened under her attention, completely ignoring me. Lily, which was obviously a stage name, was indeed strikingly beautiful, living up to Kyle's enthusiasm. After a moment, Lily noticed me standing awkwardly beside Kyle. Oh, a new face. Nice to meet you, she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. I shook it gently, feeling out of place. Nice to meet you too. I'm not really used to a place like this. Lily's eyes sparkled with amusement. Aw, how cute. Kyle, where did you find this adorable country boy? Before I could respond, Kyle cut in.
Hey, I'm way cooler, right? I'll order the usual for you again.
Lily clapped her hands in delight. Huh? Is that okay? Thanks as always. It seemed Kyle had a bottle kept at the nightclub and was drinking heavily. A hostess was assigned to me as well, a petite brunette who introduced herself as Jasmine. She poured me a drink, chatting amiably about how long she worked at the club and how much she enjoyed meeting new people. As the night wore on, I sipped my drink slowly, acutely aware of the exorbitant prices on the menu. I didn't know the details, but I was sure the prices for drinks and food here were on a different level compared to regular bars. I doubted Kyle would treat me, so I was worried about the bill. From what I could gather from the snippets of conversation I overheard, Kyle was a regular customer. He was infatuated with Lily, the top hostess, and frequently came to spend money to get her attention. While his income as a career police officer was above average, and his family was wealthy, I wonder if his wallet could keep up with his lifestyle. As the night progressed, Kyle became increasingly intoxicated. His loud laughter and boastful stories drew attention from other patrons. I cringed as he regaled Lily with exaggerated tales of his police work, painting himself as some kind of super cop.
And then, I single-handedly took down 3 armed suspects,
Kyle slurred, waving his arms dramatically.
They didn't stand a chance against me.
Lily gasped in faint amazement. Oh, Kyle! You're so brave. I knew for a fact that the incident Kyle was referring to had involved a team of officers, and Kyle had merely been part of the backup. But I kept my mouth shut, not wanting to cause a scene. As the night wore on, I became increasingly uncomfortable. The loud music, the flashing lights, Kyle's drunken behavior were all giving me a headache. I glanced at my watch, surprised to see that it was already past midnight. Kyle, I said, trying to get his attention. It's getting late. We should probably head back. Kyle waved me off dismissively.
Don't be such a killjoy, Slippery Sam. The night is young.
But even as he said this, I could see that the alcohol was taking its toll. His eyes were unfocused and he was swaying slightly in his seat. Jeez, you're drinking way too much, I muttered, more to myself than to Kyle. Kyle turned to me, his face flushed with alcohol.
I'm totally fine,
he slurred before promptly slumping forward onto the table. Lily looked at me with a mixture of amusement and concern. I think your friend might need some help getting home, she said gently. I sighed, resigning myself to the role of babysitter. Yeah, I think you're right. Thank you for your hospitality. As I settled the bill, wincing at the total, I couldn't help but wonder how often Kyle did this. It certainly explained why he always seemed so tired and irritable at work. With some effort, I managed to get Kyle to his feet and support him on my shoulder as we left the club. Cool night air seemed to revive him slightly, but he was still far too drunk to make it home on his own. Fortunately, we were staying at the same police dormitory. I took Kyle to his room, fumbling with his keys as I tried to keep him upright. As soon as we entered, Kyle collapsed on the floor and fell asleep. He was snoring loudly with no sign of waking up. He's out cold, I murmured, looking down at my former bully-turned-colleague. This worked out well for me. I knew I shouldn't, but the opportunity was too good to pass up. Quietly, I began to search Kyle's room, looking for anything that might explain why I had been called to New York. As I rummaged through his drawers and checked his computer, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. This wasn't how I usually operated, but then I remembered the top-secret document in my pocket, and the chief's words echoed in my mind. There was more going on here than meets the eye, and I was determined to find out what it was. After about an hour of careful searching, I hadn't found anything particularly incriminating, but I managed to access Kyle's computer and make a copy of some of his files. I didn't have time to go through them now, but I could examine them later in private. As I prepared to leave, I took one last look at Kyle, passed out on the floor. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to just leave him like that. With a sigh, I managed to hoist him onto his bed and remove his shoes. I placed a glass of water and some aspirin on his bedside table. He was going to need it in the morning. As I closed the door to Kyle's room behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just crossed the line. But in this world of secret and lies, I was beginning to realize that sometimes, the line between right and wrong wasn't as clear as I always believed. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Kyle, nursing a massive hangover, was even more irritable than usual. We spent our time following up on leads, interviewing witnesses, and poring over financial records in an attempt to unravel the complex web of the fraud operation. Despite Kyle's constant belittling and attempts to undermine me, I threw myself into the work. I was determined to prove myself, not just to Kyle, but to Chief Hawthorne or whoever had sent me here. It was on the 4th day of our investigation that we got our first real break. We had been tailing a man named Adam, who we suspected was one of the middlemen in the fraud operation. After days of observing his movements, we finally had a solid lead on his hideout. We found out where Adam is hiding, I said to Kyle as we sat in our unmarked car, watching the entrance to a rundown apartment building. Let's move in now. Kyle, however, seemed hesitant.
Wait,
He said, his eyes never leaving the building.
if we let him swim a little longer, we might find more accomplices.
I frowned, not understanding Kyle's reluctance. What are you talking about? If he notices we're onto him, he'll escape. We had finally pinpointed Adam's location after days of hard work. I suggested we apprehend him immediately, but Kyle was unusually cautious. His behavior struck me as odd. Usually, he was all for rushing in and taking the glory. In the end, we sought the division chief's decision, and it was decided that we would gather a team of investigators for a raid. I was waiting quietly for that moment, my nerves on edge with anticipation. As we waited for backup to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Kyle was fidgety, constantly checking his phone and glancing nervously at the building. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash from Adam's apartment. Just before the raid, Adam had broken through the window and was escaping.
What the?
Kyle exclaimed, fumbling with his seatbelt. Despite our team being on standby, Kyle fumbled and Adam managed to slip away. I didn't wait for Kyle to get his act together. I was out of the car and in pursuit before he could even open his door. What are you doing? I shouted back at Kyle as I ran. Ever since we became partners, Kyle had been looking down on me and bragging about his own achievements. But when it really mattered, he messed up. We hurriedly chased after Adam, our feet pounding against the pavement. The suspect was fast, weaving through alleys and dodging obstacles with the skill of someone who had done this before. Perhaps due to his unhealthy lifestyle, Kyle quickly ran out of breath. I could hear him wheezing behind me, falling behind further and further. I used my self-proclaimed fast legs to chase Adam alone. Years of running for bullies as a kid had made me quick and agile, and now those skills were finally being put to good use.
Damn, this guy's persistent.
Adam shouted over his shoulder, his voice tinged with panic. Being persistent is my specialty, I called back, slowly gaining ground. The chase led us through narrow alleys, across busy streets, narrowly avoiding traffic, and even through a bustling marketplace where we sent fruit stands and displays flying. I apologized mentally to the vendors, promising to come back and make amends later. After running what felt like hours but was probably only about 15 minutes, Adam seemed to reach his physical limit. His pace slowed, his breathing becoming ragged and belabored. Cornered in a dead-end alley, Adam appeared to give up. He turned to face me, his hands raised in surrender.
Okay.
He panted.
You got me.
I approached cautiously, my own breath coming in short gasps. Adam, you're under arrest for suspected involvement in a fraud operation, I said, reaching for my handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As I secured the handcuffs around Adam's wrist, I heard the sound of running footsteps approaching. Kyle appeared at the entrance of the alley, his face red and sweaty.
Good job,
he wheezed, bending over with his hands on his knees. I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. For once, Kyle couldn't deny my abilities. I had single-handedly chased down and apprehended our primary suspect. As we led Adam back to our car, I noticed Kyle giving me strange looks. Was that respect in his eyes, or something else? I couldn't quite tell, but I knew that things had changed between us. Back at the precinct, the move was celebratory. Word of successful arrest had spread quickly, and officers were patting me on the back and offering congratulations as we walked through the bullpen. Chief Hawthorne was waiting for us in the interrogation room. His eyes gleamed with approval as I gave him a rundown of the arrest. Sam has confessed to a series of crimes, I reported, trying to keep the pride in my voice. Chief Hawthorne nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth.
Great work.
I hesitated for a moment before adding, and he also admitted to that other matter. The chief's eyebrows rose slightly.
I see. Well, you've certainly lived up to the expectation of those who brought you here.
I noticed Kyle looking disgruntled throughout our report, seemingly frustrated that I had taken the credit. However, when he checked the statement, he seemed somewhat relieved. I filed that reaction away for later consideration. The chief and the other detectives in the Criminal Investigation Division were celebrating the resolution of the serial fraud cases that had been troubling the public. The mood in the office was jubilant, with officers clapping each other on the back and talking excitedly about their arrest. My job wasn't over yet. As the celebration continued around me, I noticed Kyle quietly slipping away from the group. His behavior had been odd throughout this case, and now my suspicions were reaching a boiling point. I caught the chief's eye across the room. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. That was all the confirmation I needed. Excusing myself from the celebration, I followed Kyle at a discreet distance. He made his way through the building, constantly glancing over his shoulder as if worried about being followed. Finally, he entered his office and closed the door behind him. I waited for a few moments, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. Taking a deep breath, I approached Kyle's office door. I pulled out the spare key I had made during my late-night investigation of his room and quietly inserted it into the lock. As I opened the door, I called out casually, "We finally did it, partner!" Kyle jumped at the sound of my voice, spinning around with a look of shock on his face.
Huh? What? How did you get in here?
I held up the keys, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, I made a spare key the other day. We're partners, right?" Kyle's face paled. He stood frozen like a deer caught in headlights. I stepped further into the room, my eyes scanning for anything out of place. "You should work out more," I said conversationally. "You get tired that easily. You won't even be able to catch shoplifting grandpas. You've always been bad at physical activities, huh?" Kyle's shock was quickly replaced by anger.
Huh. I don't want to hear that from someone who's only good at running away.
As Kyle spoke, I noticed something in his hand. He was trying to hide it behind his back, but I caught a glimpse of what looked like a smartphone and an SD card. "By the way," I said, my voice hardening, "what's that you're holding?" Kyle's eyes widened in panic.
I
took a step closer, my suspicions all but confirmed. "Destroying evidence?" Kyle's face contorted with a mix of fear and rage. He lunged forward, trying to push me past me to the door, but years of staying in shape had given me an edge. I grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back and pushing him against the wall. "Part of me wanted to believe in you," I said, my voice tinged with disappointment, "but I guess that was naive. I'm arresting you as a key person of interest in the serial fraud cases." Kyle struggled violently, his free arm flailing as he tried to break my grip.
What are you talking about? Hey, stop it!
The commotion must have alerted the others. For moments, the room was full of other detectives who had been briefed by the chief. Together, we managed to subdue Kyle, though not before he had knocked over his desk and sent papers flying everywhere. As we pinned him to the floor, Kyle looked up at me, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where he hit the edge of the desk during the struggle. His eyes were wild with a mix of anger and fear.
This is ridiculous!
He spat.
You're suspecting your own partner without any evidence?
I met his gaze steadily. We do have evidence, I said calmly. On the first night, when I entered your room, I had your phone and computer data extracted. Kyle's face drained of color as the realization hit him.
The first night? Ugh.
I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction in his shocked expression. For a detective, you should be more careful about how you drink. Showing that kind of vulnerable side could really damage your credibility. Upon hearing this, Kyle's face turned pale, and he hung his head in defeat. The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once. As the other officers led Kyle away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in having completed my mission, but also deep sadness. Despite our troubled history, I had hoped that Kyle had changed, that he'd become the dedicated officer he pretended to be. Kyle was taken to the interrogation room where he initially tried to deny everything. His lawyer advised him to remain silent, but faced with the mountain of evidence we had accumulated, Kyle's resolve began to crumble. For days he held out, alternating between angry outbursts and sullen silence. But as we presented irrefutable evidence from his own smartphone and computer, there was no way out. Finally, after nearly a week of intense interrogation, Kyle broke down and confessed. While Adam was indeed one of the masterminds, Kyle was the one behind him. He had been providing information about potential targets from past victims' list, exploiting his position as a detective to access sensitive information. What's more, he had been leaking police investigation information, which is unforgivable for a law enforcement officer. Every time we got close to making a breakthrough in the case, Kyle would tip off the fraudsters, allowing them to stay one step ahead of us. The NYPD top brass, frustrated by the ongoing fraud cases and their inability to catch the culprits, had suspected there might be an inside informant. Kyle was their prime suspect, which is why I had been brought in, as someone from Kyle's past who he might underestimate. As Kyle's confession unfolded, the full extent of his betrayal became clear. He had accumulated a significant debt due to his infatuation with Lily, the hostess at the Gentlemen's Club. His expensive nights out and lavish gifts had quickly outpaced his salary, even with his family's wealth. Desperate for money, Kyle had been receiving a substantial amount from the funds Adam and his group had swindled, using it to pay off his debts and maintain his extravagant lifestyle. It was a sordid tale of greed, addiction, and betrayal. As I listened to Kyle's confession, I couldn't help but think back to our childhood. Had the seeds of this betrayal been planted even then? In his need to feel superior, to have the best of everything regardless of the cost? The case finally closed and Kyle in custody. I was called to the deputy commissioner's office. Chief Hawthorne was waiting for me, his face a mix of pride and something else. Was it sadness?
I'm sorry for putting you in such an unpleasant role,
Hawthorne said as soon as I answered.
But you've done an excellent job. You've really helped us out.
I shifted uncomfortably under his praise. No, it was nothing, I replied modestly. Hawthorne shook his head.
Don't downplay your achievements, Sam. You've done what many seasoned detectives couldn't. You should be proud.
As Hawthorne spoke, I found myself reflecting on the events that led to this moment. There was a reason I was chosen to be Kyle's partner and to monitor him while letting him operate. We had known each other since we were kids, and he had always looked down on me. They thought Kyle might let his guard down around someone like me, someone he considered inferior, and they were right. I never expected that on the very first night, he would get drunk and provide the perfect opportunity to gather evidence. Thanks to that, I was able to make a spare key and extract data from his smartphone and computer. 2 days of investigation revealed that Kyle was deeply involved in the criminal activities. It seems that Kyle was caught off guard when the police suddenly discovered Adam's hideout. We now know that he leaked the investigation information just before the raid to help Adam escape. The NYPD is taking this incident very seriously, as it involves misconduct by one of their own investigators. There's no way to cover it up, and expected that Kyle will be dismissed from duty and face criminal charges. As I stood there in the deputy commissioner's office, listening to Chief Hawthorne's praise, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride in a job well done, sadness for the path Kyle had chosen, and a lingering unease about the methods we had used to catch him. Hawthorne must have sensed my conflicted feelings. He approached me and patted my shoulder lightly.
You really did an outstanding job, Sam,
he said softly. As I looked at him, I was struck by how much he had changed since I last saw him. In his younger days, he had worked in the Criminal Investigation Division and Organized Crime Control Bureau, furiously taking on dangerous criminals and making a name for himself. With his tough appearance and solid build, combined with his intimidating aura, he was known as Hawthorne the Hawk. But now, as I looked into his eyes, I saw a softness there that I had never noticed before. His demeanor stirred distant memories for me, memories of a long time ago when I was just a child, looking up at a man who seemed larger than life. Hawthorne's voice broke through my reverie.
Sam, you've grown into a fine man,
He said, his voice thick of emotion.
How's your mother doing?
The question caught me off guard. I blinked, trying to gather my thoughts. Oh, she's doing well, I replied. She's busy with farm work and was even chosen as district representative for the Women's Association. Hawthorne nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He glanced around the empty office, then turned back to me, his expression serious.
It's just us now,
He said quietly.
You don't have to be so formal.
I felt a lump form in my throat as the realization hit me. Chief Hawthorne is my biological father. The truth I had kept hidden for so long, even from myself, came rushing back. He and my mother divorced when I was about 3 years old. However, their marriage had been harmonious. Separation wasn't due to a lack of love, but something far more dangerous. Back then, there was an intense conflict between foreign gangs who had entered the country illegally, and local criminal organizations, particularly in the Times Square area. The streets of New York had become a battleground, with innocent civilians often caught in the crossfire. Of course, the police didn't stand idle and cracked down hard on these groups. At the same time, my father was working in the Organized Crime Control Bureau and arrested several gang members in Yakuza. One of them was a high-ranking boss who held a grudge against my father. The foreign gangs in particular were ruthless. They threatened that if the boss wasn't released, something might happen to his family. Fearing for his loved ones, my father made the painful decision to divorce. My mother and I moved far away from New York to her hometown. It was a decision made out of love and protection, but it had shaped the course of my entire life. Years later, when things had settled down, we were able to reunite with my father. By then, however, my mother and I had grown accustomed to small-town life. My father had also been promoted and was in a busy position. Although we didn't officially reconcile, we meet as a family a few times a year. Despite his tough appearance, my father is a kind man who loves his family deeply. Perhaps it was my admiration for him that influenced my career choice. When I told him in high school that I wanted to become a police officer, he was overjoyed, even though I could see the worry in his eyes. Now, standing in his office, I felt like that young boy again, seeking his father's approval. Hawthorne must have sensed my thoughts because his next words caught me by surprise.
By the way,
He said, his tone casual but his eyes intent.
have you gotten used to life in New York?
I shifted uncomfortably. Well, everything in New York is too fast-paced for me. I think small-town life suits me better. Once this case is wrapped up, I'd like to return to my original precinct. To my surprise, Hawthorne shook his head firmly.
No, I intend to have you officially assigned to the NYPD, not just as a temporary transfer.
I tried to protest that this wasn't what we had agreed upon, but my father just grinned. The expression transformed his face, making him look years younger.
I know it's selfish,
He admitted.
but I've missed so much of your life, Sam. When I learned that you wanted to become a police officer, I was thrilled. We've been apart for so long. I want to watch over my son's achievements from a closer vantage point. It's a selfish desire as a father, I know, but will you consider it?
As I looked into my father's hopeful eyes, I felt my resolve weakening. The thought of staying in New York, of working alongside my father and perhaps rebuilding a relationship we had lost, was tempting. Could I really leave behind the life I had built in Peaceful Valley? The community that had taken me in, raised me, supported me. It was a difficult decision, one that would require a lot of thought. For now, though, I simply nodded. I'll think about it, I said softly. Hawthorne's face lit up with a smile. He reached out and squeezed my shoulder gently.
That's all I ask,
He said. As I left his office that day, I felt as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The secret mission was over. The truth about Kyle had been revealed, and I had been reconnected with my father in a way I never thought possible. I didn't know what the future held, whether I would stay in New York or return to my small town. But I did know one thing. Whether in a big city or a small town, my work ethic would remain the same. I would continue to serve and protect, to uphold the law and fight for justice. And now, I would do with the added motivation of living up to my father's expectations. As I stepped out of the NYPD headquarters and into the bustling streets of New York, I took a deep breath. The city that had once felt so foreign and overwhelming now held the promise of new beginnings. Whatever path I chose, I knew that experience of the past few weeks had changed me. I was no longer just Sam Turner, the small-town cop. I was Detective Sam Turner of the NYPD, son of Chief Hawthorne, and I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The sun was setting over the city skyline, painting the buildings in hues of gold and pink. As I walked towards my temporary apartment, I couldn't help but smile. Life had a funny way of coming full circle, and I was curious to see where this new chapter would lead me. For now, though, I had a report to write, a decision to make, and a future to contemplate. The adventure, it seemed, was just beginning.